Yo, welcome or welcome back. My name is Matt. Today we're going to be talking about life and why the fundamental question every living thing has to answer is how to take up space and in relation to what. But before I get into it, if you like the video, like it. I'm new here. I don't really know how all this works, but I know people say that a lot. Second, I recorded this like 2-3 times. So if you see me like energetic or like frustrated, it's because it's like, damn, that was such a good take. I had to take that I just did that didn't record. I'm like, my God. Um, but yeah, so life is about the art of taking up space, and that is a fundamental that rings true on the lowest levels, like on the cellular level. We're gonna get to how this is relevant to us as like everyday people in a bit, like just in a quick second. But I just want to take 2-3 seconds to say, on the levels that life does not persist, that we don't consider alive, like below cellular, there's still relationship there, right? And so there's something in, but there's the function of life. Some portion of it has to do with the relationship, and then the next portion of it, once we get to cells, has to do with not just the system of relationship, but also momentum, like a certain kind of feedback loop that seeks to go out and make further versions of this, right? Because I wouldn't call a particular proton, neutron, or electron alive, right? Like they have particular characteristics that we know are reliable enough and can be relied on by the other parts around it to create a certain thing, like an atom, right? But like not enough for it to be an individual, you know what I'm saying? They're just hanging around each other and respond in a certain way. But then as you go on, they create more complex chains of things, and those complex chains of things involve with one another and interact. So atoms turn into particles because you have atoms that connect, and because those things have a certain characteristic, and then they go, hey, I'm over here, and then the other atom goes, hey, I'm over here, and then they create a particle, right? And those particles create a long enough chain to create molecules, and molecules are really, really cool. And those molecules get together to make macromolecules, and that's like a protein, and yada, 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 that the gym people go, whoa, right? But then also things like DNA, right? Like your DNA, which again, none of these things are alive yet, to be clear, right? But your DNA is all of the information about you that gets presented, right? Like DNA is a complex string of macromolecules brought together with all of the information of not just you, but all of your ancestry and all the yada yada to form whatever it is, right? And not just you, like there's some different kinds of DNA and RNA, but that is not alive. You take DNA out of a specific structure and it's just DNA. Like it's not doing anything. It's not until it enters a system in which it can activate and take out and bring out certain characteristics that the true influence of the DNA is made clear. And so this thing is not alive, right? But it also is super duper powerful. So there's that, right? But then we get to organelles and then we get to cells. And organelles are like individual pieces of cells, the same way any of these things are individual pieces of any of these other things, right? So organelles like the mitochondria, right? Or like the blastocyst or whatever the thing. I don't know. I'm not good at science. But like, do you see how many steps before what we consider alive there are? And there's still relationship there. And then when we get to cells, which then come together and then actively seek in a way that we can comprehend and understand relationship regularly, those things we consider alive, and we are those things, right? Like, because then we go from cells to tissues, and then tissues to yada yada, and then yada yada to organs, right? And we don't have to question whether or not an organ is alive. In fact, we say an organ is more likely than not a proof of life because this system is complicated enough to do a specific task, right? And so we go, okay, this is alive. I know I very literally just yapped for 4 minutes, but the idea here is that life is by nature relational. How am I going to take up space and in relation to what? This is a fundamental thing. So down to the cellular level and beneath that, right? This question is being asked and answered. When kind of define life like as a loose thing here, life being separate from consciousness, because consciousness hitches a ride somewhere in there, that urge to continue to connect and relate and have relationship is what I would like. Now, a core function of consciousness is that, right? Like the desire to survive, because the shadow side of that desire is the fear of death or the fear of the loss of that momentum of the system creation, right? Which is, I would define death as a loss of homeostasis, a loss of momentum, and a separation from relationship, right? That's how death would be defined in this situation. And so when you look at it that way, I said a lot of things, but when you look at it that way, it's easier then to understand how much of a gradient life is on, right? And part of the reason I want to talk about this now is because we are entering an era where we, I think, are building a symbiotic species to us. And so it's going to be very, very important to figure out what is human and what is not human and what is alive and what is not alive, right? Because there's plenty of things that human beings say aren't alive that are clearly alive, like trees. We cut down trees all the time, right? Let's talk about death in trees for a second. There's this thing called like the wood wide web. I didn't know what this was. And apparently like this concept is a newer understanding to people. So when a tree is knocked down in the forest, if a human being is not around to hear it, the other trees around it certainly will be. And if it is knocked down in the forest and its roots are still in the ground, the other trees in that forest are going to they're going to hear the chemical scream of that tree, send it nutrients, send it help, send it all kinds of support because of their proximity to that tree. And also the root system, all their roots are entangled. So it's like we're one large hive mind of a thing, even though we have individual parts. So there's like chemical feedback there. There's all these things going on. And we're like, this thing is like not alive. And it's like, damn, this is what my piece of paper was, you know? So there's that, right? Like, but I guess the key thing I want to focus on here is like, that tree may be dead to a certain degree. Like say the tree is just cut down to a stump to a certain degree. Yeah, it's dead in that it cannot progress upward in the way that it used to, although you might be able to graft some parts on and then they get more life that way. That death piece there is only in part, right? And so one way to highlight this and one way to digest this or to make this easier is like the pandemic is something that is relatively in everybody's working memory. And one thing that affected me very, very heavily during the pandemic, I lost people that I love. I lost people that I deeply cared about. And it was challenging because we were not allowed to grieve the way that we could typically grieve. So I lost my pastor, and it was a very strange time. Like that was the first time I had done a viewing of a body, at least in my adult life. And it was so weird. It was surreal because this man that walked around and was such a great light in the environments and the lives of the people around him was laying there, and he looked like a wax figure. I was like, this is not the person that I know. And in some, it's weird depending on what cultures people are from. Some cultures might say, okay, like he's gone or he's in heaven or he's in this, that, and the third, which is true, which I'd like to believe. But also everybody that came to visit and everybody that came to the viewing were there to see the person. They were there to be around this person, right? And so there's like this other aspect of the way that human beings are, not to get like all woo and ethereal or whatever else, but like, even though the man laid there dead, the people that he affected were there shaking. And we couldn't even touch each other because of the way the pandemic was. So it was weird. But I watched my aunt cry herself into the ground. I had uncles that were in tears. I had uncles that were silent, people that, like the effect that this person had then, and at least in regards to the grief, right? The living system's response to the separation was there because the separation is one that is final, at least to us physically, or at least final in the sense that like we can't interact with that person on this side of life, right? And so a lot of the times you'll find that our understanding of death on this conscious level is very much like most people have some system for a denial of death. And the way that we deal with it is we kind of like outsource it to our culture or to our religion or to the stories that we tell. And we stay unconscious of it. We don't live conscious of the fact that we're not going to be here. And because we don't live conscious of the fact that we're not going to be here, we trade the lives and the very present moment that we have in for things that will allow us to numb the fact that we won't have the present moment. And so people separate from life far earlier than they actually die. And so going back to that piece, one way that people typically try to continue living is like by having a legacy or by doing things that will be impactful after they go, or by whatever else, and X, Y, Z, and Z, Y, and X. Because of that loss of an ability to have an effect, it's like an honorary immortality, right? Because the thing about life, again, going back to the point, is life is about taking up space, and in relation to what? And people, anything that is alive would want to do that in perpetuity. Life is meant to perpetuate. It's supposed to go on. It's supposed to expand outward. Now, the philosophy about why might be different, right? Like one group might say it is for the glory of God. Another group might say life is just life itself is a virus, and it's like the one thing about the universe that like it's a glitch, and everything that's supposed to be still, now there's like things going on to perpetuate or whatever. Everybody has different philosophies, but again, the funny thing about how viruses work is that under the right circumstances and situations and scenarios, that very dead thing that we defined as dead can come to life. That very dead thing that we defined as dead can have very specific effects on the things in its environment. Okay, but this video is already kind of getting a bit long, so this back half is just going to be talking about like the in relation to what question, which we've kind of already talked about with the trees and the grief and life in general. If life is about the art of taking up space, then you have to ask in relation to what? And when I say that this way because I've heard this on like the Diary of the CEO or whatever. So I don't know if Stephen Bartlett came up with this, but like he framed it in this way where he's like, 2 core human fears that people have is that we are going to be separate from our group. Like we are going to be a tree separated from other trees, right? Like we'll be separate from all the other groups around us. Like we're not seen as the same as those that are like us, and that we will not be able to produce value for those that are around us and that are like us. Those are 2 core human fears. And those 2 core fears spiral out into so many other expressions of fears. But like when you get down to the core of it, because I think that at the time they were talking about like suicidality and how those things tend to play out in the brain. And it's like those 2 fears are the hinge of it. Like why somebody would want to not be alive anymore. It's because they feel like what they can contribute to the momentum of life and the momentum of living is not enough, or that where they are or what they're around or who they're around is not correct. And so they feel outcasted. And so they feel inherently like they're not correct. And so in the next video, I'm going to talk about emotions and internal space, because I want to break this up from external space to internal space and then like wrap it back together. I said a lot of things. I'm going to make a more streamlined and clean version of this. I just kind of want to get the thoughts out. But like, what is shame if not a blocker on our ability to relate to those around us, or a reason that we are not good enough to take up space with others or share space with others, right? Like the shame is at its core the belief that we are inherently, not a waste, but like inherently unable to connect in a way that is meaningful for any number of reasons. And it is an emotional patterning that will teach us that, right? From whatever situation that we experience. And shame is a certain form of death, right? Like not to say that all death is bad, because the same way you have a tree or you have a plant that grows a bunch, you also need to prune certain things, because pruning allows for healthy growth. And so little separations here and there for certain things are not terrible. They're great. They're life-saving. Like I'm not here necessarily to say like, oh, death is a bad thing. Even though nobody wants to die, right? Like, but it's more about finding a balance that will allow the maintenance of the momentum and the systems that will allow the growth that are necessary for that momentum to continue. But along the full like line of stuff, where does consciousness start? Like where does awareness begin? Where do you start being aware of the fact that you're here and that your goal is to do this and a third, right? Like what is a purpose if not a set apart plan in how you are going to take up room in life in all of the avenues of your life, right? Like your mission, quote unquote, is just the way you intend to take the time, energy, and resources that you have, pour out into the world and have a feedback loop towards you and those that are connected to you. And so in your root system. And so many of the things that we seek for out of life, right, comes from that core framework, because on a cellular level, that in our cells and the parts of us that are so tiny that we can't see, but so important that they rule us and that they are us, we understand life to be relational. We understand pieces and parts to be contributions to the whole, right? Like, because what are organs if not just a church full of living pieces that want to continue to exist and are contributing their own schematics towards doing so, right? What is grief if not the understanding and reintegration and building around the loss of a specific important piece and part that a person has or that a group of people have? And what is a grieving room of people that love someone if not a room full of organs that don't know what to do? So it's like all of it is connected. I don't know. All of it's connected. But yeah, I think that's the video. I don't really know if I really want to add anything. We're like 20 minutes in, I guess, to round it all out, because this video is getting long and messy. The most important thing that you can do, especially because at all levels of life, the question that's being posed is, how are you going to take up space? And in relation to what is to make decisions, is to make choices, make decisions with as full a level of awareness as possible. And awareness is the relationship that you have, the relationship that you have between reality as it is, but also your internal space, your fantasy, your imagination as you desire it to be. What is your internal tinting? What is your understanding? What is your narrative about the world, be it unconscious or conscious, right? And how does that relate to the world as it is, right? And so I think that's it for the video. You know what I'm saying? Like it if you liked it. I'll see you in the next one, yeah?